My name is Clara and this is my bench. I've sat here for 30 years. I know every crack in the pavement. I know every kid who walks by. That night, a new rookie, all stiff uniforms and arrogance, decided my bench was his to clear. He thought he was policing a bad neighborhood. What he didn't know was that he was in my house. And he was about to be disciplined. The varnish was gone. Years of sun and rain and sitting had worn the wood smooth in some places and left it splintering in others. I ran my hand over a familiar gouge near the edge, a mark left by a skateboard 9, maybe 10 years ago. I remembered the boy, Leo. He works at the garage on 12th Street now. This was my bench. It faced the basketball court, or what was left of it. The chain-link nets were long gone, replaced by stiff, empty steel rims. The pavement was cracked, weeds pushing up through the gray surface. People called this a bad neighborhood now. They used words like blighted and high risk on the news. To me, it was just Maple Street. It was home. My name is Clara. I'm an old woman. My hair is white, my hands are spotted, and my knees ache when the damp rolls in. I spent 40 years as a trauma nurse. I have seen more trouble than this park bench ever will. I came here every day at 4 o'clock, right after my afternoon tea. I brought a small thermos, weak lemon tea, mostly water, and I sat. I watched. At 4:15, the high school kids cut through. A boy named Marcus, his pants halfway down his legs and headphones clamped over his ears, walked past. He saw me. The tough look on his face softened for just a second. He pulled one headphone off. "Mrs. C," he mumbled, giving me a short nod. "Marcus?" I replied, my voice steady. "Keep your head up. That math test is Thursday." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." He put the headphone back on and kept moving. I knew his mother. I helped her deliver him, back when the clinic on Main Street was still open. At 4:30, the young mothers came out, pushing strollers with wobbly wheels. One of them, a girl I didn't know, stopped. "Ma'am, you okay? You need anything?" She was new here. "I'm just fine, dear," I said. "Enjoying the afternoon." She looked at me, then at the empty court, then at the graffiti on the wall of the corner store. She looked confused, but she nodded and pushed her baby along. The old sounds of the neighborhood were my comforts. The rumble of the 7 bus as it hit the pothole on the corner. The distant, rhythmic thump-thump of a basketball on packed dirt down the alley. The smell of exhaust from the boulevard, and underneath it, the smell of fried onions from Mr. Patel's store. I knew this place. I knew its sounds, its smells, its people. I was part of it. I wasn't just sitting. I was watching. I was a landmark. I was the one you came to when you didn't want to go to the clinic. I was the one who held the ice pack on a split lip, no questions asked. The sun started to dip, hiding behind the tall, ugly apartment building to the west. The air turned cool. A shiver ran up my arms, and I pulled my old blue cardigan tighter. One by one, the streetlights began to hum. The light directly over my bench was always the last one. It flickered, a weak orange pulse, then buzzed, then finally clicked on with a harsh, sudden glare. It washed everything in a sick yellow light. This was the light the news crews used when they came here. It made everything look worse than it was. I was gathering my thermos, getting ready to head back to my small apartment, when a new sound cut through the evening. It wasn't the 7 bus. It wasn't Marcus's music. It was a low, steady engine. A new car, well-tuned. I looked up. A brand new police cruiser, all white and blue, with the city crest sharp on the door. It was moving slowly. Too slowly, it wasn't one of the regulars. I knew Officer Diaz, who waved. I knew Sergeant Chen, who sometimes stopped to ask about his mother's roses. This car was different. It drove past the park, the headlights sweeping over the cracked pavement. Then at the corner, it stopped. It sat there for a long minute. I watched the brake lights. Then the car made a slow U-turn and started coming back. It pulled up to the curb, 20 feet away. The engine idled. The headlights stayed on, pinning me to the bench. I just sat there. I hadn't done anything wrong, but my hand, the one holding the thermos, tightened. Something was wrong. This was not a friendly visit. This was a predator circling. The car door opened. The car door opened with a short, clean squeak. It was a new car sound. The dome light came on inside, showing me a clean, empty passenger seat and a computer mounted on the dashboard. He took his time getting out. First, a black polished boot hit the pavement. Then the rest of him. He stood up, but he was still half hidden by the open door. He put his cap on, pulling the brim down low. Then he adjusted his belt. I heard the jingle of equipment, the snap of a strap. He finally stepped away from the door and closed it. The car shut off, but the headlights stayed on, shining right at me. He was young, so young. His face was smooth and his shoulders were broad in the stiff new uniform. The blue was dark, almost black in the yellow light. The creases in his pants were sharp. His badge looked like a mirror. He polished it. I knew he polished it every morning. He didn't walk straight to me. He started walking a slow circle, his boots making a heavy thud, on the pavement. He looked at the empty court. He looked up at the flickering streetlight. He looked at the shadows by the closed corner store. He was acting. He was showing me that he was in charge of this whole space, and I was just one small part of it. After making his little circle, he stopped. He stood about 10 feet away from my bench. He put one hand on his hip, right next to his radio. His other hand held a long black flashlight. He didn't turn it on. He just held it, like a club. He waited. He wanted me to say something first. He wanted me to be nervous, to ask what was wrong, to give him a reason. I did not. I just sat. I held my thermos in my lap with both hands. I looked at him. After a long 10 seconds, he let out a loud breath. He was annoyed. "Malamnek," he said. "Good evening, Grandma." His voice was too loud for the quiet park. The word neck was not kind. It was the word you use when you want to make someone feel small and old. "You can't be here," he said. I kept my voice low, but clear. "I am just sitting, young man, enjoying the air," he laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was a short, sharp sound. "The air? This air?" He waved the flashlight at the street. "You're enjoying the smell of trash and exhaust? In this neighborhood?" He took a step closer. The leather of his new boots creaked. "You look like you're waiting for something," he said. "And sitting around here in the dark with no purpose. That's called loitering." I had seen this before. It was new power. It was the kind of power that is nervous, the kind that has to prove itself by pushing. He was a boy with a new sharp tool, and he was looking for something to hit. "I am not waiting for anyone," I said. "I live here. I am just sitting." He shook his head, and a little smile played on his lips. It was not a nice smile. That's what they all say. He took another step. He was in my space now. I could smell his aftershave. It was strong and cheap. "You're sitting on a park bench in the dark in a high-crime area." He said each word slowly. "That is suspicious. You look suspicious." I just looked at him. I did not blink. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Or maybe you're not just loitering. Maybe you're working." He let that word hang in the air. "Waiting for a langganan?" "A customer," he was accusing me. An old woman on a park bench of selling drugs or selling myself. The ugliness of it hung in the air, but I did not let my face change. I just breathed, in, out. My stillness made him angry. He wanted me to yell. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to be afraid. I was none of those things. His smile disappeared. His eyes got hard. "Dengar," he said, "listen. I don't know if you're confused or if you're selling, and I don't care." He moved his hand from his hip and rested it on his belt near the handcuffs. "I am asking you to move along now. Get up, go home." His voice was flat. "Or I am going to make you move." I did not move. The wood of the bench was hard under my legs. The air was colder now, and the thin fabric of my cardigan felt useless. My knees ached. I could feel a tightness in my shoulders. But I did not move. The rookie, Officer Hassan, stood there. His face was a mask of angry confusion. He was not used to being ignored. He expected fear. He expected me to scurry away. I said, "Get up," he repeated, his voice tighter this time. "I heard you." My own voice was steady. It did not shake. That was one thing the ER had taught me. Never let them see you shake. I live 2 blocks away. This is my park. I am not moving. He took a step back, as if to get a better look at me. He was making a show of it. "All right, neck. You're defying a lawful order." "I am just sitting," I said. "There is no law against sitting." That's it. He put his flashlight away, hooking it back onto his belt. He was getting ready. "I'm done playing games with you." He tilted his head, and his voice became oily and false. "You're just—" "What? Confused? Is that it?" He tapped his temple with his first finger. "You don't know where you are? You don't know your name?" "I know exactly where I am, Officer Hassan," I said. I saw his jaw tighten when I used his name. I had read the shiny new tag on his uniform. It made him angrier. He was just a boy, but he had a dangerous new power, and I was not playing by his rules. "You're a public nuisance," he snapped. "And you're resisting." "I am not resisting. I am sitting. It's the same thing when I tell you to move." He almost shouted. He reached for his belt. This time his hand went to his side. I heard the click of metal on leather as he unfastened a strap. He pulled out his handcuffs. They were silver. They looked cold and heavy. "Stand up," he commanded. "Put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest." I looked at the cuffs in his hand. Then I looked at his young, angry face. "You are making a very big mistake, young man. The only mistake is you, thinking you can disrespect this uniform," he said. He was enjoying this now. This was the part he had been waiting for. "Come on, Juanita tua yang bingung." "Confused old lady." His voice was a sneer. "Let's go." "Time for you to go." He stepped forward and grabbed my arm. His grip was strong. His fingers dug into the thin muscle above my elbow, right through my cardigan. The sudden, rough touch sent a jolt of pain up my shoulder. I didn't pull away. I didn't struggle. I just held on to my thermos with my other hand. "Let go of me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was cold. "Or what?" He laughed. "You'll knit me a sweater?" "Stand up!" He yanked. He pulled me off the bench. I was unsteady. My bad knee locked and I stumbled. He pulled me up so hard my thermos slipped from my grasp and fell to the pavement with a loud, hollow clank. "You are hurting me," I said, the words tight. "Then stop resisting." He yelled, pulling my arm up to twist it behind my back. He raised the open cuff. Just as the cold metal touched my wrist, a new sound cut through the night. It was not a bus. It was not music. It was tires. A long, hard screech of rubber on asphalt, a sound of pure panic and anger. Headlights flooded the park, impossibly bright, washing out the weak orange streetlight. They pinned both of us, the rookie and me. A car door slammed. It wasn't a gentle close. It was a slam so hard it echoed off the corner store. Officer Hassan froze. His hand was still crushing my arm. The handcuff was still pressed against my skin. He turned, confused and blinded, toward the lights. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered. A voice, a deep, powerful voice that I knew as well as my own, roared across the pavement. "Petugas!" "Officer!" The rookie's hand tightened on my arm. "He was a statue! Get your hands off her!" The voice boomed. "Now!" A large man was running toward us, his shirt bright white in the headlights, his tie flying over his shoulder. Hassan's grip on my arm instantly went slack. The man ran straight at us. He was a big man, tall and wide, and he moved with a purpose that was terrifying. He didn't slow down. Officer Hassan, his hand still on my arm, finally let go. He shoved me away slightly, as if to distance himself from what he had done. He raised his hands, palms out. "Sir, stop!" I have the situation under control. The man didn't stop. He was 3 feet away when he finally slowed, his face red, his chest heaving under his white shirt. His tie was loose, hanging crooked. I knew that tie. He looked right past the rookie. His eyes, full of anger and panic, found mine. The anger vanished. The panic turned into a deep, sharp worry. "Clara?" he breathed. His voice, which had been a roar, was now a strained whisper. "My God, Clara, are you okay?" He didn't wait for an answer. He put one huge hand on Officer Hassan's chest and shoved him. It was not a gentle push. Hassan stumbled back 2, 3 steps, hitting the side of his own patrol car. I said, "Get back." The big man yelled at him without even looking at him. Then he was in front of me. He dropped to one knee on the cracked pavement, right next to my fallen thermos. His movements were clumsy, urgent. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. He reached out but didn't touch me, as if he was afraid I would break. "Clara, talk to me. Are you hurt?" "I'm all right, Michael," I said. My voice was a little shaky, but I got the words out. I rubbed my arm where Hassan had grabbed it. A dark bruise was already forming under the skin. "I'm just cold." Michael looked at my arm. He saw my hand rubbing the spot. He saw the open handcuffs still dangling from Hassan's belt. He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, the warmth was gone. He stood up. He stood up very slowly, to his full height. He was a full head taller than the rookie. He turned around. Officer Hassan was standing by his car, his cap in his hands. He was pale. All the arrogance was gone, washed away by pure, cold fear. "Kepala," Hassan started. "Chief." "Sir, I didn't know." She was loitering. She wouldn't move. She looked suspicious. Chief Michael took one slow step toward him. She looked suspicious. It was not a question. It was a statement. Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. "Yes, sir," Hassan said too quickly. "It's a high-crime area." She was sitting here in the dark. She wouldn't answer my questions. He scrambled for the word. She was non-compliant. I was arresting her for loitering and resisting. Michael stood directly in front of Hassan. He was so close, their chests were almost touching. "Loitering," Michael repeated, the word tasting like poison. "Resisting." He pointed a thick finger at me. I was still standing, leaning against the bench for support. "Do you have any idea who this old woman is, Officer Hassan?" Hassan was shaking his head. "No, sir. Just a local—" "This," Michael's voice suddenly cracked like a whip, "is Nyonya Clara." Mrs. Clara Hassan flinched. She was the trauma nurse at the old St. Jude's, Michael said, his voice low and intense. "The one that closed before your academy training even started." He tapped his own chest, right over his heart. "She is the woman who saved my life, when I was a rookie just like you. When I was lying in an alley 3 blocks from here, with a hole in my stomach and my blood all over the pavement. She was the one who kept her hands on the wound. She was the one who kept me from dying right there in the dirt." Hassan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "She has lived in this neighborhood for 50 years, Michael went on, his voice getting louder. "She knows every person on this street. She knows their parents, and she knows their children. She is the reason this neighborhood is safe. She is the reason people in this neighborhood talk to us. She held this community together when everyone else left." He leaned in, his face inches from the rookie's. "And you called her neck. You put your hands on her. You were going to put her in cuffs for loitering on a bench that is more hers than it is yours or mine." There was a long, terrible silence. The only sound was the buzz of the streetlight overhead. Michael stepped back. He looked at Hassan with a coldness that made me shiver. "Give me your badge." Officer Hassan's hands flew to his belt as if to protect his badge. His face went from pale to white. "Sir? Please, no, sir." His voice was high, cracking. "It was a mistake. A mistake in judgment." "A mistake?" Michael's voice was a low growl. "You put your hands on her. You had cuffs out. For what? For sitting? You call that judgment? Michael didn't yell. He was colder than the night air. You are a disgrace to this uniform, officer. You failed the first rule. You failed to protect. You became the threat, he pointed to me. I was still leaning on the bench, my arm throbbing. You think this job is about flashing your power? About scaring old women? You think it's about making people afraid of you? Michael took a step closer to the rookie. This job, this badge, it is about service. It is about knowing the difference between a criminal and a citizen. And you just showed me you have no idea what that difference is. Hassan was looking at the ground. He looked like a small boy, thoroughly broken. Sir, Be quiet, Michael commanded. You have one and only one thing left to do tonight. You are going to turn around. You are going to look Ñoña Clara in the eye, and you are going to apologize for your monstrous disrespect. He waited. Hassan didn't move. Now, Michael said. The word was not loud, but it had the force of a shove. Hassan turned to me. His face was a mess of fear and shame. His eyes were watery. He couldn't look at me, not really. His eyes darted from my face to my shoulder to the ground. Ñoña Clara, he stammered. I am very sorry. His voice was a mumble. Speak up, Michael said, his voice flat. Hassan flinched. He took a shaky breath. Saya minta maaf, Ñoña Clara. I apologize, Mrs. Clara. I didn't know who you were. It was a mistake. I was just trying to follow procedure. His apology was weak. It was an excuse. He was sorry he got caught. I looked at him. I looked at his young, scared face. You were not following procedure, officer, I said, my voice clear in the quiet park. You were being cruel. Hassan's face crumpled. He had no answer for that. Michael stepped forward. That is enough. Get out of my sight. Sir, my badge, Hassan whispered. You will go back to the precinct, Michael ordered. You will go to my office. You will sit in the chair outside my door. You will not speak to anyone. You will wait there until I arrive. We will discuss your future. And your badge. Then, do you understand me? Yes, sir, Hassan said, his voice thick. Go, Hassan almost ran. He fumbled with his car door, pulling it open. He fell into the driver's seat. The car started with a roar, the engine racing. He backed up, squealed the tires, and sped off down the street, his red taillights disappearing around the corner. The park was suddenly, completely silent. It was just me and Michael, standing under the harsh yellow light. Michael stood with his back to me for a long time. I watched his broad shoulders rise as he took a deep, shaky breath and fall as he let it out. He did this 2-3 times. The anger was leaving him. The tension was going. He bent down and picked up my thermos from the pavement. It was dented on one side. He turned around. The chief was gone. The angry man was gone. It was just Michael. My Michael, the boy I'd known since he was a scared rookie, the man I'd watched become a leader. His face was full of warmth and a deep, painful regret. He held the thermos out to me. Clara, he said, and his voice was soft. I am so sorry. I am so sorry he did that to you. He looked at my arm, at the dark mark already forming on my skin. Let me see your arm. Let me get you home. He held the dented thermos in his large hand. The metal was scraped where it had hit the pavement. Michael's face under the hard streetlight was just tired. The anger was gone, leaving only a deep sadness. I am so sorry, Clara, he said again, his voice rough. He is one of mine. That makes this my fault. You came, Michael, I said. That's all that matters. Let me see your arm, he said. It wasn't a request. It was the gentle command of someone who was used to caring for people. I didn't argue. I pulled up the sleeve of my old blue cardigan. In the yellow light, the mark was ugly. It was already turning a deep, dark purple. 4 fingerprints, and the smudge of a thumb on the other side. My skin was thin. It had marked easily. Michael sucked in a sharp breath. It was a small pain sound, like a man being punched. He stared at the bruise, and his face tightened. This was not the chief's anger. This was Michael's. He will answer for this, he said, his voice quiet and cold. I swear to you, he will. He offered me his arm, the other hand still holding my thermos. Come on, let's get you home. It's cold. I have an ice pack in the car for that. I looked at his strong arm, the arm of the man who ran the entire police force of this city. Then I looked at the bench, my bench. I reached out and gently took the thermos from his hand. The metal was cold. I turned, and with my good arm, I lowered myself back down onto the familiar worn wood. I sat. No, Michael, I said. He stood over me, a large, confused, protective shadow. Clara, please, it's late. You're hurt. You shouldn't be out here alone after this. This is my bench, I said, my voice perfectly flat. I sit here every evening. I sat here last night. I will sit here tomorrow night. I am not going to let that boy, or any man, chase me away from my own home. This park is my home. Michael looked at my face. He saw the lines, the age, but he also saw the woman he'd always known. The woman who did not bend. He sighed. It was a long, heavy sound that seemed to empty all the anger out of him, leaving just the man. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, sat down on the splintered park bench next to me, and placed his hands on his knees. His car was still at the curb, engine idling, its headlights cutting two perfect white beams into the darkness. We sat in silence for a full minute. The sounds of Maple Street, which had been scared into silence by the shouting and the police cars, slowly returned. The distant rumble of the 7 bus, a dog barking from a backyard, the thump-thump of music from a passing car. He called you Nick, Michael said. He didn't look at me. He looked at the empty, cracked basketball court. He called me many things, I said, my voice just as quiet. Michael turned his head. His eyes were dark. You know, that night, in the alley, when I was on the ground. I remember, Michael. I was so scared, he whispered. I couldn't feel my legs. Everything was cold. I thought that was it. But all I could see was your face, hovering over me. You were yelling at the paramedic, but you were looking at me. You weren't scared. Oh, I was terrified, Michael, I said. You were bleeding faster than we could clot. No, he said, shaking his head. You weren't. You were angry. You were in charge. You told me to stop whining and breathe. You told me I wasn't allowed to die. You held my hand. He looked down at his own large hands now resting on his knees. I built my entire career on that night, Clara. On what you did. On trying to be half as brave, half as good, as the nurse who wouldn't let me die in an alley. He looked up, and the warmth was gone. His eyes were hard. The chief was back. He's finished, he said, his voice flat. I'm taking his badge tonight. He will not wear a uniform in this city tomorrow. I promise you that. It was a hard, final, angry promise. The debt was being paid. I looked at this powerful man, this man who could end a career with a single word. The boy I had saved. And the next one, Michael? I asked, my voice very soft. What will you teach the one who replaces him? My question hung in the cold night air. What will you teach the one who replaces him? Michael's hard expression, the chief face, wavered. He looked away from me, back at the cracked pavement. He ran a large hand over his face, rubbing the tiredness from his eyes. Clara, he put his hands on you, he said, his voice low. He threatened you. He dishonored you. He dishonored me. He dishonored the badge. There is no lesson for that. There is only a consequence. And that consequence will be, what? I asked, my voice just as quiet. You fire him. You take his badge just as you said. He leaves. He is angry. He feels he was treated unfairly. He goes to another town, gets another job, and he is the same angry, scared boy. He has learned nothing. And you? You hire a new rookie. I paused, letting the silence sit. And what do you tell that one, Michael? Don't arrest old ladies? He didn't answer. He just stared at the ground. You are not that man, Michael, I said softly. The man who saved me tonight is not the man who just wants revenge. You are the man who runs this city's police. You don't just punish. You teach. You lead. Michael let out a long, slow breath. He looked at his own polished shoes, then at my old, comfortable walking shoes. For 20 years, he said, I've been trying to clean up this city. I've focused on response times, arrest rates, getting the guns, getting the drugs. I've been fighting a war. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a sudden, clear understanding. And you? You've just been here, on this bench, holding ice packs, knowing names. You haven't been fighting a war, Clara. You've been holding a community. And I forgot the difference. He stood up from the bench. He looked tall in the yellow light. He's not finished, he said, his voice different. It wasn't angry. It was certain. Michael, Officer Hassan, he's not finished. I'm not firing him. I waited. Oh, he's off the street, Michael said quickly. He'll be on desk duty for a long, long time. He'll be writing reports. He'll be logging evidence. He will not carry a gun or a badge on these streets until I say so. But he will not be fired. He looked at me. You want to know what I'll teach him? I won't teach him. You will. Michael, I am not a police instructor, I said. No, he said, and a small, tired smile touched his face. You're not. You're a nurse. You fix things. You're going to help me fix this. He pointed at the graffiti on the corner store wall. He's going to clean that. On his own time. He pointed at the weeds on the basketball court. He's going to pull those. He looked down at the bench, at the peeling varnish. And he is going to report to you, Mrs. Clara, 1 day a week for 2 hours. He will have no gun, no uniform. He will just have his hands. And he will do whatever you tell him to do. He will paint this bench. He will sweep this park. He will learn the names of the people he serves. He will learn this neighborhood. He will learn you. That will be his lesson. And that will be his consequence. I looked at this man, this chief of police, who had found a better way. Not revenge, restoration. That seems fair, I said. He can start on Saturday. I will bring the sandpaper. Michael's smile widened. The warmth was back in his face. Yes, ma'am. He held out his hand. The same hand he had held out in an alley 20 years ago, covered in his own blood. Now, he said, his voice gentle again, let me walk you home. It's late, and I am getting you that ice pack. This time I took his hand. His strong fingers wrapped around mine, and he gently, carefully, helped me to my feet. He picked up my dented thermos and tucked it under his arm. He put his other hand on the small of my back, not to push, but to steady. We left the park. We walked slowly across the cracked pavement. We left the harsh yellow light of the lamppost and walked down the quiet, dark street toward my apartment building. I knew these blocks. I knew every crack in the sidewalk. And so did he. We didn't talk. We just walked, the chief of police and the old woman, 2 landmarks of Maple Street, finally going home.